My name is Andalyn Parker, and at 32 years old, I can say my life has been a roller coaster of emotional highs and deep lows. But what I'm about to tell you is the hardest part of my journey, the one that shook me to my core. It all began when I met James. When we crossed paths, I believed it was the kind of love story people daydream about, the one we all secretly hope for. It was a chilly autumn day in Boston when it all started. After a long workday, I decided to stop by a small harborside cafe. I had just taken my scarf off when the wind picked up, causing it to slip off my shoulder. Before I even realized what was happening, James caught it mid-air just before it could drift away. His smile was effortless and full of warmth. He handed me my scarf, saying, "You nearly lost this to the sea." I laughed, thanked him, and before I knew it, we were sitting together, talking over coffee. And that was the beginning to strangers in a cozy city cafe, feeling as though we had known each other forever. James had this effortless charm about him that made me forget the world. Outside our little corner of the cafe, he worked in finance, a job he was proud of, always talking about his ambitions and plans for the future. I admired his drive, and in return, he called me thoughtful, soft-spoken, and stronger than I gave myself credit for. Within just a few weeks, we couldn't imagine life without each other. He'd surprise me with flowers at my office, and on weekends, we would visit little hideaways in the city that felt like they were ours alone. My friends joked about how quickly things were moving, but I never questioned it. It felt like everything was falling into place. 2 years into our relationship, on a snowy evening in Central Park, he proposed under the glow of Christmas lights. The world around us shimmered with magic as he knelt down and slipped the ring on my finger. I could hear people clapping, and in that moment, all I could think was, this is the man I'll spend my life with. The next summer, we married in a small chapel surrounded by family and friends. My parents were overjoyed. I'll never forget how my father held back tears as he walked me down the aisle, while my mother squeezed my hand, whispering how happy she was that I had found my joy. Our first days of marriage were beautiful. James and I created a home together, picking out furniture, painting walls, and making plans for our future. We both dreamed of having children, and when I discovered I was pregnant less than a year later, it felt like the final puzzle piece had been put into place. When I told him, he swept me off my feet, spinning me around in a way that made it feel like a scene from a movie. He promised me late-night feedings, bedtime stories, and family vacations. For a brief moment, I believed I had everything I ever wanted, but soon things began to change. The cracks weren't obvious at first, just small signs. James, who had once been endlessly patient, started to show signs of frustration. When I complained of feeling nauseous or tired, he'd sigh like I was exaggerating. If I asked him to run out late for something I was craving, he'd snap at me, telling me to stop being so demanding. The warmth in his voice became sharp, biting. One evening, when I felt particularly unwell, I asked him to sit with me, but he muttered something about needing to finish work and locked himself in the study. I sat on the couch, hand resting on my belly, convincing myself he was just stressed, that every man gets nervous about becoming a father. Despite the distance, there were still moments of the man I had fallen in love with. Sometimes he would come home with baby clothes he had seen on his way back from work, grinning proudly as he held them up, and on other nights he would rest his head on my lap, speaking softly to the baby growing inside me, making promises of a future full of adventure. But what happened next was something I could never have prepared for. Those moments kept me clinging to hope. Yet deep inside I felt a gnawing fear that something was unsteady beneath the surface. I brushed it aside, because love has a way of blinding you, of convincing you that imperfections are only temporary clouds. My parents noticed though. My mother pulled me aside once and asked if everything was fine at home. I smiled and told her not to worry. I wanted so badly for everything to be fine that I convinced myself it was. Looking back now, I see how I ignored the warnings. His impatience, his growing distance, the subtle way he began to retreat from the picture we once painted together. It was all there, quietly signaling that my dream life was not as secure as I thought. But at that time, it told myself what many women tell. It's just a phase. We'll be okay. I held on to the vision of our little family. I imagine a late night rocking our baby to sleep, James beside me with gentle laughter, my parents visiting on weekends, the house filled with warmth. That vision was what carried me forward, even as uneasy whispered at the back of my mind. If only I had known how quickly that vision would shatter. Pregnancy was not the glowing magical experience I had imagined. The first trimester hit me like a storm I couldn't escape. Morning sickness wasn't just in the morning. It lingered all day. My body ached. I was constantly fatigued. And yet I told myself it was all worth it for the tiny life growing inside me. My mother, Margaret, became my anchor. She'd calavered asking what I had eaten, reminding me to rest, and even dropping off homemade soup when she thought I hadn't been eating enough. James, however, wasn't as supportive. In the beginning, he made a show of fussing over me, but that faded quickly. By the second trimester, his patience was thin. When I asked him to join me for checkups, he often claimed he had meetings he couldn't miss. If I mentioned my back pain or how hard it was to sleep, he would roll his eyes. One evening, I was nauseous and asked him to grab ginger tea from the store. He sighed heavily and muttered, "You act like you're the first woman to ever be." The words cut deep, but it swallowed my feelings. I kept telling myself he was stressed with work, that it wasn't about me. Still, I found comfort in small things. Late at night, when James was asleep, I'd place my hand on my belly and whisper to my baby. I'd tell him about the world, about how much I wanted to see him grow, about how loved he already was by his grandmother and grandfather. In those quiet moments, I felt strong, even if my marriage was showing cracks. Then came the day everything changed. I wasn't due 4 weeks, but one night, sharp pains tore through me, sudden and unrelenting. I doubled over, clutching my stomach, panic rushing through me. James washed him, but instead of jumping to my side, he froze, annoyed more than concerned. "Are you sure it's not just indigestion?" he asked flatly. I could barely speak, tears streaming down my face, begging him to drive me to the hospital. When we arrived, the doctors confirmed what I feared. I was in labor far too early. My body was trembling, mimicked, spiraling with terror. Hours later, my baby boy was born. So tiny, his skin almost translucent, his cries faint but fighting. They rushed him into I remember reaching out, desperate to hold him, but my hand stouched only air. My chest ached in ways I cannot describe. "Will he make it?" I asked the nurse, my voice cracking. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "He's fragile, but he's strong. We'll do everything we can." I sat in that sterile hospital room, numb with fear, praying silently that my child, my little Ethan, would cling to life. My mother and father arrived quickly, their faces pale but determined. My mother hugged me so tightly I thought he'd collapse into her arms. My father asked sharp questions to the doctors, demanding every detail about Ethan. They stayed with me hour after hour, while James drifted to Thebak. I expected my husband to sit beside me, to reassure me, to show method we were in this together. Instead, he grew colder with each passing day. Hadn't touched Ethan's tiny hand through the incubator glass. He didn't sit with me through endless nights of worry. One morning, when I was holding back tears by a thunside, James muttered, "This isn't what isn't up for. This isn't how life was supposed to be." His words pierced through me like ice. I wanted to scream, to ask how he could say that about his own son, but exhaustion silenced me. I simply turned my face away and focused on Ethan's fragile chest rising and falling in the incubator. Days blurred, machines beeped, nurseryed in and out, and my parents never left my side. My mother would bring me fresh clothes, sit with me, and pray softly under her breath. My father kept encouraging me, telling me Ethan was a fighter, telling me I was stronger than he knew. James, on the other hand, became almost a stranger. He started spending less time at the hospital. When he was there, he scrolled endlessly on his phone or left after a few minutes. One night I begged him to stay, but he shook his head and said, "I can't do this every day. It's too much." Then he left. I stared at the door long after it closed, wondering what kind of man abandons his wife and child in such a fragile moment. The day the doctor said Ethan's condition was stable enough to give me hope, I felt both relief and heartbreak. Relief that my baby had a fighting chance. Heartbreak that his father wasn't standing beside me, holding my hand, sharing in the moment. Instead, James grew even more distant, as though the sight of his own son was a burden too heavy for him to bear. I knew them, though I didn't want to admit it out loud, that my marriage was breaking apart at the very seams. I held on as long as I could, hoping James would wake up one morning and decide to be the man he once knew. But instead of stepping closer, he drifted further away with each passing day. His visits to the hospital became less frequent, his excuses more careless. When he did show up, his presence felt like a shadow, silent, detached, and impatient to live. One evening, after I had finally been discharged, but Ethan still required close monitoring, I returned at home to find James sitting at the kitchen table, his suitcase by his side. My stomach sank. I knew something was wrong, but still I asked, "What's going on?" He looked at me with a tired expression. The kind people where when they've already decided and nothing you say can change it. "I can't do this no more, Andalin," he said flatly. This isn't the life I wanted. I can't handle the stress, the doctors, the uncertainty. I feel trapped. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. He lowered nervously, waiting for him to smile and say it was a cruel joke. Booth's face remained blank, his voice steady. "You'll be fine with your parents' help. They seem to be better at this than me, anyway." Those words sliced through me deeper than any knife could dot. My body shook as I held Ethan close to my chest, whispering to him that it wasn't true, that he was worth every sleepless night. But James didn't even look at his son. He picked up his suitcase, muttered a half-hearted, "I'm sorry," and walked out the door. The sound of it shutting echoed like a final verdict. I stood there for what felt like hours, frozen in disbelief. How does a man promise forever vow to stand by you in sickness and health, only to abandon you when life turns hard? My tears fell onto Ethan's tiny blanket, and I whispered again, And again, I'll never leave you, not ever. The days that followed were brutal. My body was still healing. My baby was fragile. And my heart was... If not for my parents, I didn't know how I would have survived. Mimitha moved in temporarily, helping me through every sleepless night, every tear-filled breakdown. She held Ethan as though he were her second chance at motherhood, singing soft lullabies and giving me moments to breathe. My father, Richard, became our shield. He handled paperwork, managed bills, and Ivan confronted James once, demanding and swerved. But James avoided him, ducking phone calls, refusing meetings, shutting every door to accountability. He'll regret this, my father said one night, his jaw tight with anger. No man walks away from his blood without consequences, but anger wasn't enough to erase the reality. I was alone. Alone in the quiet hours of dawn when Ethan's cries fled the apartment. Alone when fear gripped, wondering if he would grow strong enough to survive. Alone when exhausted made my bones ache. The truth is, I felt abandoned not just as a wife, but as a human being. My sense of worth crumbled. I had believed I was cherished, chosen, loved. Now I was discarded, left with nothing but a fragile child and my parents' mercy. And yet, in those dark days, a strange kind of strength began to grow. Each time I held Ethan and rocked him to sleep, I felt a flicker of each smile, each tiny movement, his fingers against mine reminded method. I wasn't entirely broken. I had something worth living for. Still, I would be lying if I said I didn't cry myself to sleep. I wept into my pillow, asking God why James had turned his back on us, why the man I loved became a stranger overnight. But answers never came. Instead, I learned to lean fully on my parents. Mimitha's words became my mantra. You can control his choices. Andalin. Butu can control how you rise from this. She would stroke my hair and remind me that strength often grows in the soil of heartbreak. My father, though less tender, would sit quietly by my side, sometimes holding Ethan in his broad hands, his eyes softening in ways he rarely showed. Their presence didn't erase the sting of abandonment, but it kept me from collapsing completely. Slowly, I started to see James for who truly was, not who I had hoped he would be. His absence became a strange kind of clarity. The man who left me at me weakest had no place in the story of me strength. Even so, late at night when the house was quiet and Ethan slept peacefully against my chest, I would sometimes picture James wondering if he felt any regret, any guilt. Did he ever think about us? Did he imagine the son had abandoned? Or was he lost in his own selfish world, pretending we never... Those questions haunted me. But with every dawn, with every smile Ethan gifted me, the ache of James's absence began to shift. It was still there, heavy and undeniable. But now it was laced with something else. Resolve that I would build a life without him. Resolve that Ethan would grow up, knowing love so strong it would drown out the echo of his father's. Resolve that I would not let abandonment be the final word of our story. The first few months after James walked out were like walking barefoot across broken glass. Every step forward hurt, but I kept moving because Ethan needed. His tiny body required constant doctor appointments, sleepless nights, and medicines that never seemed affordable. My savings disappeared quickly, and for a while it felt like I was drowning. But then my parents became my lifeline. My mother, Margaret, was my anchor. She would scoop Ethan into her arms with a smile and tell me, Go lie down, Andalin. You can't pour from an empty cup. At first, I resisted, convinced that I had to do everything myself. But I soon realized that her help was not weakness. It was. She became Ethan's second mother in so many ways, holding him through his fevers, singing to him when I was too tired to stay awake, and reminding Method I wasn't failing just because it needed rest. My father, Richard, was the quiet strength in the background. He didn't always say much, but his actions spoke volumes. He would show up with groceries, pay for Ethan's medicine without a word, and keep the house running when I was too overwhelmed to notice the small things. One night, when the bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, and I broke down in tears, he placed his hand on mine and said, "Don't carry this burden alone, Andalin. We're in this together." Those words gave me a new kind of courage. It was during one of Ethan's nap times that I got the idea of starting something off my own. I had always been good with crafts, sewing little handmade designs and decor. My friends used to admire the way I made old clothes look new, or how he could turn scraps into beautiful things. What if I could turn that into a With my parents' encouragement, I began small. I started making simple home decor pieces, cushion covers, little embroidery designs, handmade gift items, and posted pictures. First, I thought no one would notice, but to my surprise, orders began trickling in. A friend recommended my work to someone else. Then that person told another, and before I knew it, I had more orders than I could manage alone. Business grew so fast that Isometums felt dizzy. I would sew Letinto the night, Ethan asleep beside me, and my mother would gently take over in the mornings so I could catch a few hours of sleep. My father helped me with the financial side, making sure I didn't underall myself. The little business that began at my dining table soon became a steady stream of income. I invested every cent into growing it, and within 2 years, I had a proper shop. People started recognizing my brand. Customers praised the quality of my work, and word spread quickly. What amazed me most was how this success changed me. For so long, I had defined myself by James' rejection. Believing his leaving meant I wasn't good enough. But standing in my shop, serving happy customers, and seeing Ethan laugh and thrive reminded me of the truth. I was stronger than abandonment. Ethan himself had come my biggest motivation. Watching him grow stronger every day filled me with joy I can't describe. Doctors who doubted his survival began calling him the little fighter. His smile could brighten even the darkest of days. And as I watched him take his first wobbly steps, clutching my fingers for balance, I realized that James had missed the most beautiful parts of life. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were still nights when exhaustion overwhelmed me. Days when orders piled up to high ambitions, when I wished someone would hold them the way. I held Ethan, but my parents never let me feel alone. Margaret would often tell me, "See how far you've come, Andalin. Look at what you've built." And Richard, though not one for many words, would beam with pride every time Simone mentioned my success in town. Their support wasn't just practical. It was emotional glue that kept me together. I stopped waiting for James somewhere along the way. The hope that might return fizzled out, and in its place grew something better. Peace in knowing that Ethan and I were surrounded by real love. Peace in realizing I didn't need James's approval to succeed. And slowly, a new version of myself emerged. One that wasn't defined by heartbreak, but by resilience. One that could laugh again, dream again, and even dare to hope for Brit. What I didn't know was that's life I had rebuilt. The business, the joy, the strength would one day be very thing James would come crawling back to. But by then, I wasn't the same woman he had left behind. Tea was quiet afternoon in the shop, sunlight spilling across the shelves when Theodore opened and in walked the last person I ever thought I would see again. James. For a moment, the air left my... He looked older, worn down, with tired lines carved deep into his once handsome face. His suit hung loosely on him, as though even his clothes had given up. And he whispered, his voice cracking. I stood still, gripping a stack of receipts, my heart steady. He wasn't the same woman he abandoned yet. Behind me, Ethan peeked curious life from the counter, his eyes full of innocent wonder. James's gaze locked onto him. His lips trembled. Is that, my son? Yes, I answered flatly. This is Ethan. Tears spilled down his... He's perfect. I've missed so much Andolin. I came to beg. I made the worst mistake of my life, leaving you, too. I was scared. I was weak. Booty want to be part of his life now. Please give me another chance. Ethan tilted his head, confused. Mum, who ish? I knelt to his level and brushed his hair back. This is someone Mummy used. Talk no, sweetheart. Ethan nodded slowly and went back to his drawing, unaware of the storm between us. James's hands shook as he leaned forward. I regret everything. I know I can never make it up, but I want your forgiveness. I want to be his father. I want to come back. His words twisted in the air. I looked at the man who once held my hand in church, who once promised to protect me through sickness and health, yet ran one life, tested him. My heart ached but not for him. It ached for the years Ethan never had a father, for the nights I cried into my pillow, for my parents who carried us when he should have. James, I said, my voice calm but firm, I carrieth weight of your absence, and somehow it made me stronger. Ethan is happy. We're whole without you, and I refuse to reopen the wound you left behind. Hatred to interrupt, but I raised my... Listen, forgive you, not because I deserve it, but because I need my own peace. I refuse to carry bitterness any longer, but forgiveness doesn't mean a second chance. You chose to walk away and you must live with that. His face crumpled, shame washing over him. So, you're saying there's no way back? It shook my head. No way back. Ethan will grow, knowing love, strength, and family, but not with you. That chapter is closed. The silence that followed was sheaving. James lowered his head, tears dripping onto the floor, his body trembling under the weight of his... Then slowly he rose, shoulders bent like a man carrying stones. Without another word, he walked toward the door. As it shut behind him, I felt no hatred, no anger, does peace. My forgiveness had set me free, while his shame became his burden to carry. I turned back to Ethan, who was smiling proudly at the picture had drawn. Look, Mom, he said. It's you, me, Grandma, and Grandpa. My chest swelled with warmth. The family home never gave up, and as James Deister stared down the street, I knew some people don't deserve a second chance at your table. But letting go, that was the gift I gave myself. If there's anything my journey has taught him, it's this. People may walk away when life gets hard, but their leaving dust define your worth. I built a life for myself and my child, not because James abandoned us, but but because I refused to abandon myself. Forgiveness gave me peace, but wisdom kept me from opening the same door twice. So when hell left again, this time in shame, I stood tall, because sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go.